I think this concept just keeps coming up. Order and chaos, the duality of reality. So you have order, which is land, safety, knowledge. It's our habitat. Water is the other. It's the unknown. It's dangerous. It's chaotic and full of monsters. But then you also have the beach. It's the threshold. It's where land meets sea. Order meets chaos. And so many of these great stories and myths take place at that crossover, that threshold. Today we're going to talk about the real meaning of Jaws, the original summer blockbuster by Steven Spielberg. Why are we doing Jaws? Well, Jaws came out exactly 50 years ago to the day when this will release.
Right.
1975, the very first summer blockbuster. This is our very first episode, so I thought it would be fitting. And because I think Jaws lays out some very foundational themes to understanding the meaning of films. And as a film student, you should love Steven Spielberg's work, right?
He's definitely one of the best filmmakers of all time, I think. And he's got the studio backing for a lot of his big pictures. He's got good acting. He kind of has the ethos to rep that, especially I think starting with Jaws was really one of his first big pushes.
Yes. Well, in fact, when we get started, why don't you give us the layout of the movie?
Jaws, directed by Steven Spielberg, is a suspenseful thriller set in the small beach town of Amity Island, where a giant great white shark begins terrorizing beachgoers. After several deadly attacks, Police Chief Martin Brody teams up with marine biologist Matt Hooper and grizzled shark hunter Quint to put an end to the shark's killing spree. As the trio ventures into open sea, they soon realize that it is they who are being hunted. The film is widely credited with launching the modern summer blockbuster and remains a landmark in cinematic suspense.
But I would argue, Curt, that it's really set in there's two films kind of that coexist in this exact 2-hour runtime. The first 60 minutes take place on the island, following very closely Brody, the police chief, and his family and his interactions with the political influencer
Mayor Vaughn,
yes, and others. But I think the suspense is building on land. There's elements of fear and politics, and then the second half of the movie, they even have the boat very slowly moving out to sea as a transition moment. And then the second half is a seabound character drama where the shark takes center stage.
Yes, and this is totally a silly aside. The Jaws, the board game, as I am an avid board gamer, is broken into those two exact parts where you play one half of the game is on the island, one person playing the shark and everybody else. So yeah, it's a very natural break, but it actually works, which, sometimes we'll talk about this movie featuring my glass Return of the Jedi feels like two movies, and it does not work so as well as Jaws does as two different movies. But we'll talk about that in the future.
We'll get to Jedi, don't worry. I know how much you love the Ewoks.
I actually do. I know they were supposed to be Wookiees. We got that in Revenge of the Sith. But yes, Return of the Jedi. Oh, it's a Freudian slip. The original title. Anyway, off track.
Tangent number one, Marianne.
Ding.
Yeah, so I think one thing I want to jump to next before we continue to transition down to more and more points that we want to make. I think we would be remiss if we didn't start off by really getting into the iconic score.
John Williams, breakout into the modern consciousness.
Yes, John Williams, famous of many, many films with Steven Spielberg and others. His composition of the iconic dun, 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 dun. Right, so it's funny. I kind of have a as a kid, I remember that appearing in pop culture, and I hadn't seen the movie, but I think it transcend that track, that E to F note just transcended into like my
It means
culture.
shark.
Yeah,
Like you hear that
yeah.
music and you think
It was
shark.
like, whether it was like a commercial for cereal or whatever it was that I remember as a kid, where like you just didn't have to see the movie, but you knew it was just so present in the culture.
There's also a sense of dread
Right.
about it. This is the tempo increases, and and it's very
Right.
because the movie uses suspense so much. It's a very suspenseful song.
Yeah, and it's funny. I remember hearing in a note that Spielberg actually laughed at it when he first heard the score, and he thought it wouldn't work, and then it did, because it just in the editing, it just came out so strongly. And I think in the opening of the film, to go from that as like an overture, classic sort of overture, transitioning from like a old time film where credits ran at the beginning and there was an overture of music that kind of gave you a sense of what was happening, and then it hard cuts to the young people on the beach playing harmonica and guitar. Very different type of tone, quick transition there. That I thought that was like an interesting, like, okay, yeah, this is about a shark, but we're here to have fun. And then the shark's back within like 3 minutes,
Yeah.
reminding you why you're there.
Yeah, also interesting, something I noticed in the film when it's later on when the boys are pretending they have the cardboard fin.
Right.
Shark music doesn't play.
Right.
The movie tells you, that that's not the real threat.
Right.
And then once you go back over to the pond, you hear
You hear this.
you
Yep.
get that track comes back.
That's right. That's
it's
right.
Interesting little.
No, I like that. That's true, because there's the scene where they're all positioned on the beach after the first attack, and nobody wants to get in the water, and then the mayor has to come down
The poor guy.
to convince that guy and his family to get in the water. And
Which, can I also just throw out here, everybody in this movie feels too old.
Yeah.
They've got these young kids. The mom, Alex's mom's kind of old, and then the mayor is like, my kids were out there, and he looks like
he could be his 60s. Yeah.
And then that old guy that he gets to go out with his wife, I'm gonna assume they're grandkids. That's my bad assumption.
I would say they're not, but yeah, I think that was just like casting, and perhaps
It was the time.
Yeah, it was a different time.
Yeah.
Different time. Our parents' generation, our grandparents' generation, raising their kids
Later in life.
had kids later in life. This is a kind of would you say a ritzy island with more well-to-do folks from the cities who maybe had children later in life.
Yeah, but there's also one of the themes which we'll get into, the islander. This idea, you're not an islander. You kind of hear in the off dialogue when Brody's at the beach, you're never going to be an islander.
Right.
You just weren't born here.
Right.
And the in crowd, the out crowd.
Well, I think that's a really great frame up for our next point, which is this idea of order and chaos, which I think you wanted to get into.
Yes.
To set up the rest of the points, because really it's that juxtaposition between order and chaos of the shark, the order of Brody, and the shark really being the main character of the film, and really don't even see much of until 20, 30 minutes into the film. Even you don't even see a glimpse of the shark, but it's omnipresent.
Yes. So I just want to throw out my disclaimer here. I'm absolutely borrowing some work from the good doctor Jordan B. Peterson. I'm sorry for all you haters out there. I do enjoy his early work. And Jung, although I'm going to try and steer away because I think there's been a lot of ground trodden on the psychology of this movie. It's not quite what we're going for. Look, we're mixing the psychology, the philosophy. So with all of those disclaimers out of the way, one of the reasons why I wanted to do Jaws as our first episode is because I think this concept just keeps coming up. Order and chaos, the duality of reality. Order, is this often symbolized by land. Order is what is known, what is safe. It's knowledge. It's when you come home and everything's where it should be, and you can take things for granted. It's safety. But order also more broadly when we're talking about, symbols. Order is society, it's culture, it's the city, it's, civilization. It's also truth. Order is established fact. Um, and so you have these dual images. You have order, which is what we know and where we're safe. Chaos is this opposite. And we got to be careful. We don't want to look at this in terms of good versus evil. Although in the story there is good versus evil, but order and chaos transcend this idea of good and evil.
Mhm.
Chaos is often symbolized by water in myth and story. It's destructive, it's mysterious, it's unknown, but it's also potential, it's creativity. It's in some sense it's heresy. If order is truth, chaos is heresy. It's the thing that challenges you, that makes you question. But the reason why we tend to think of chaos in terms of immoral, evil, is because it's frightening. It's something we're scared of. It challenges our presuppositions and often is more dangerous than order on its face. You can think about Amity Island as this image of order. It's society. It's the small, safe town. Something that Spielberg's really good at in his movies is capturing Americana, Norman Rockwell, white picket fences. And so you have that, but it's an island. It's surrounded by this sea of chaos. This, the black water. You can't see into the water. It's unknown. So you have order, which is land, safety, knowledge. It's our habitat. Water is the other. It's the unknown. It's dangerous. It's chaotic and full of monsters, as we're going to talk about. But then you also have the beach. It's the threshold. It's where land meets sea, order meets chaos. And so many of these great stories and myths take place at that crossover, that threshold, which is, the place of danger, so where you can get eaten, but it's also the place of opportunity, which, especially in this story, Amity Island, is a tourist location. It's the beaches. It's that threshold point. Because really, this duality of life, what's known, what's unknown, what's comfortable, what's uncomfortable. This is the basis of life. I mean, if you think about it, everywhere in life you're encountering the unknown. But it's at that nexus point where growth happens. So now that we've talked about, kind of laid that out, there's negatives to both sides. It's very easy to look at the negative of chaos. But it's worth noting why this story is important, and I think Spielberg intentionally shows, is the negative side of order. There is such a thing as too much order, or the tendency towards order, which is something that I think you noticed in the film, specifically with the town of Amity.
Yeah, really, it's a 2-act movie, right? So we have this first act where we have Brody introduced as the police chief. We meet his family, his kids, a lot of different scenes to represent this nuclear family. The wife is present. There's 2 little boys. And he faces an evil that we all face every day, which is bureaucracy and the moneymaker, mayor and city council. And I think one of the moments that's kind of representative of little things that I catch that I think, I'm sure you catch little things as well, but it was even funny when they're racing into the council chambers and Brody's chasing after the mayor. He even bumps his head on a sign, and it was like the office of the accountant. So he's being blocked by either his opposition, the enemies in the first act are the mayor and the people of the town who really are relying on the tourists to come in for the 4th of July weekend, but even physically gets knocked in the head by a sign that the city accountant is the office door is right in the way physically through a crowded hallway to get into, after I believe the second attack, after the boy is eaten at the beach.
Which I also think is interesting. The movie opens with that. Of course, you have the girl, right? And she's running, and the boy's chasing, and she gets into the water. The boy is drunk, falls asleep on the beach while she gets eaten.
Yeah, he gets dizzy and kind of passes out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the town.
Right,
This
right.
attack is happening. This
Right.
threat is here, and the boy, I'll catch up. Whatever.
Right.
And even when you notice she's missing, Brody's on the beach and whatever, he's more concerned about getting in trouble.
Right.
He's like, well, hey, I reported it to you.
Right.
And so even at the very beginning, you have negligence,
Mhm.
you have stagnation, complacency,
Mm.
where all they can think about is those summer dollars,
Right.
which is a tendency of order, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the tendency of order and that the drunkenness, perhaps.
Decadence.
Yes, decadence. The idea that you don't have to be on guard as well, and I think that's representative of the entire town, like you said, the whole island of Amity. To be, they have to ship people in on literal boats where they drive their car off of the boat, fresh from their lives and coming into this. They're seeking this oasis, and it's surrounded by the sea. It's an island surrounded by the sea. It's representative in that as well. That the shark is just like, if you feel trapped.
Which leads us then to talk about chaos. Which
Right.
It's much more easy to understand the fear
Right.
of chaos. Oftentimes, stories involving chaos have the dragon,
Right.
the monster, this great beast, this personification of the destructive force of chaos. And of course, in this movie, the titular wielder of the jaws
Switches there.
works the title in. And why I think this is an interesting, and we'll want to circle back to this when we talk about Quint, because I think it's important.
Yeah.
The shark is not, you could say he's an antagonist, but he's not evil. He is mindless, unintelligent, destructive force.
Amoral is how I kind of picture it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Amoral. He just eats, and even
Right.
Hooper has a good line. This thing is a killing machine. It's designed to swim, eat, and make sharks.
Right.
And in like some of the ancient stories, you have the dragon that captures the maiden. It's chaos deteriorates, it's atrophy. And so you have, even at the very beginning, you have the maiden, this girl, a symbolic virgin of sorts. She's naked, she's vulnerable. You have the city sleeping, the boy sleeping, and she's devoured, she's taken. You have the little boy, Alex, who's the future. Chaos destroys, it takes. And it is a very powerful image of the Leviathan.
Yeah, the Leviathan was something that came to me in the sense of this mythic sea creature of many Greek and even Hebrew myths, and as you get back into the ancient days of fear of the sea, you have this fear of the sea. I love you pointing out the idea of the youth represented in the first couple killings, and then quickly that third one of doesn't matter, young, old, male, female, kind of represent and get each. The shark doesn't care really. I think later in the film the shark begins to care. You kind of get that sense that he's chasing after the boat. But in the beginning it's just like, who's going to be the next victim? And one thing that I really like about, I like to be wrong, and when I'm watching a movie, I enjoy being led one way and actually being tricked, because so often with film training I can kind of like, oh yeah, I see that, let's see what they did there, and then my wife, I'll even be watching a movie with her, and so often I will say like, oh, I'll like even make a noise, and she'll be like, what? What do you know? And I think that when Brody's son cuts his hand, it was cueing that a young child would be the next victim. And I thought it might even be one of his kids. But I kind of thought in the moment, I thought the next second the thought was, no, I don't think he's going to eat one of his kids. He already has a moral obligation as the chief of police. He's not going to abandon the city, His wife wants to. She's like ready to go. I'm gonna take the boys and go, but he advises her, stay. You're safe if you remain on the island and don't go in the water. Yeah, I think that there's that idea that this Leviathan, it's not just a predator, it's primal, it's unknowable.
Well, it's interesting you bring up the shark that doesn't make distinction. And so if you look at the story, Genesis, the second Genesis account of creation, where Adam's task is to name the creatures. It's to delineate, to give distinction. And so as Adam is the primal man, first man, his job is to tame nature and to give it order, to name it, to set things aside. This is what this is what that is. The natural role of chaos is to tear apart those distinctions. It's to not to delineate. And sometimes that's helpful because we become stagnated in our terms and what, we are imperfect beings. And so, but in this instance, doesn't matter, young, old, male, female, dog, he eats a dog. I mean, it's implied that he eats the dog. Something also that's interesting is the shark, twice here, we have these twilight moments of where the shark appears, first with the girl swimming, at the interchange between night and day, which is itself a threshold. The shark appears, and you can see the color grading of the screen. You see the sun lit, but it's very dark. And so that's when the first shark appears, and then later in the film, after they've sung their song and gotten drunk, it's the same trick. It's technically light outside, but the camera's so dark, and that's when the shark literally tries to break through the ship. It's where the floorboards start and the flood starts to happen. It's the intrusion upon safety, which I think is interesting and intentional, that those times happen.
Absolutely. I think the allegory that stuck out to me too is in Moby Dick, and we'll talk more about the Ahab character in Quint as well, but I think the shark represents this idea of the whale as well in Moby Dick, because there's this creature being sought after, and that's really more of the second act. Everyone's sort of passive in their order. They're trying to ignore it. They're trying to stay where it's safe, but pretend it's not real and stay focused on the order. Whereas in the second act of the film, you start to get into we're going to go try to take on the chaos. And both of those you realize are, if you just try to take on chaos, go straight on at it, you're often going to be met with, and then that's what Quint and, Hooper, thank you. Quint and Hooper. That's what Quint and Hooper try to aim at with aggression and science, and it's not until, Brody has the moment of courage and rises up above as the hero, and spoilers, and defeats the shark.
Synthesis, to use the Jungian term, integration.
Right.
He integrates the two
right
aspects, the conscious and the subconscious.
Right, which is a classic, I think, representation of the main character to be able to do that, to rise above and find a way. Whether it was intentional that you could say it was intentional that he's like, if I throw this tank in his mouth and then shoot it, that's like, because it was dragging 3 barrels along, stabbed into its flesh. Like, you're not going to physically overpower this like Quint wanted to. The cage is torn apart, and how Hooper wanted to address it. But I think it was interesting that it was a mix of the two aspects that ended up defeating the shark, which is the science of the tank and then the gun. So it's sort of the two pieces that Hooper and Quint were trying to get at, and Brody to kind of rises up using those two elements together as the hero.
Brody's journey is every hero's journey. It's all of our journeys. It's bridging the gap between order, which is knowledge, truth, wisdom, and chaos, which is flexibility. So many people, and we'll talk more about this with Hooper. We get so caught up in what you know in your head, book knowledge, and you go out into the real world and it doesn't do anything, and you end up becoming a hypocrite. Because life is so dynamic, it's always changing. you're encountering different things. And so straddling that line, walking between being firm enough in what you know and the truth, but flexible enough that you can meet the changing landscape of reality. And so I think you're right about the integration of Hooper and Matt.
Hooper and Matt.
Hooper and Quint.
Hooper and Quint.
He's,
See, now you got it.
Yep.
I did it once. It's funny because like in reviewing the actors and the everything too, I started using like in my head it's like, oh, that's Richard Dreyfuss.
Yeah.
So like I'll say Richard in my head, but then I gotta remember which one is he, and they all have R names. The actors are all R names, and let's transition to Scheider for a second, and talk about Brody specifically as the hero. You started to get into him as this archetype of the lawman. He's tasked to bring order within the chaos, but from the safety of the order. Like he's trying to shut down the transition point. We need to shut down these beaches, but the order is denying the truth that from the city mayor to the city medical examiner to the city council to people who don't want to penny up to pay Quint early on in the movie. You could have gotten that part started really fast if you would have decided, yep, okay, go get it now before the 4th of July.
There's some chaos that will not stay at the door.
Right.
So there's an inclination. So home is another, symbol of order, the house. And so you lock your doors, you lock your windows. And if I just hunker down and stay safe, then, whatever's outside, that's isolationism. It's appeasement in some sense, you know, what we've
disordered.
Yeah. Well, so that's the thing. It'll come knocking. And so that's where the shark, even all of the protective, the helicopters, the boats out in the bay, the shark doesn't go to the beach. It goes into the pond.
Right.
It's this inlet. It's as far into the island as you can get without getting onto land.
Right.
And so ultimately, and what's interesting about Brody, and you see Brody's arc, he's very fearful. He used to be a New York cop and has escaped to Amity Island, this little sleepy New England tourist town where there's no danger. There hasn't been a murder in 25 years. And so he's constantly avoiding, trying to shirk. And even his journey he's always being pushed by other people or by circumstances.
Right.
Until I think a very pivotal moment is Alex's mom comes as this harbinger of judgment.
Right.
She lays a moral judgment on him. And at first we can kind of feel like the mayor, Mayor Vaughn, where like, well, no, it was the mayor that was keeping Brody back from doing the right thing.
Right.
But Brody he internalizes the judgment and recognizes, no, I knew what was right. I knew what needed to happen, and I didn't.
I went along with it. He questions his moral obligation. He questions his authority the whole time, but he's complicit.
Yes, he is.
Complicit, and 5 fingers met the face. So he got the slap of a physical brunt of reality. To the point of almost embarrassment as well in front of everyone with this shark hung behind. They think they caught the shark. So there's this element of victory quickly turning into a shameful moment where a young boy's mother who has lost her son, she learns the reality that he was aware, and he represents the hero. The mayor isn't the hero. In that sense, it's very clear at that point that it's going to be up to Brody.
And you can even see like an abdication of his responsibility, that he gets the fisherman to catch the shark, and which is ultimately, by the end of the story, that's his job. He's the one to defeat the shark.
Right.
But I think the mayor stands there, his reaction to the mother's condemnation. Well, she's not right, Brody. That's what we want to say. So that's a turning point. That's a conversion point. There's many along the way. Brody crosses many thresholds as he gets further and further along his journey.
And Hooper is introduced at that point as well. Not that we want to go scene by scene here, but I think it's helpful in the sense of introductions. because there's a layer peeled back each time. Hooper is representative of a solution, and he comes in with this element of a scientific backing, saying they're measuring the carnage of the first young woman, and he immediately knows this is not a boating accident. And he looks over at the medical examiner. He's just standing by the door knowing too, because he knew. And it was, he even said, like, yeah, they put Brody types shark attack, like it was established, but then it changes. So the order is already disrupted and
Corrupted.
They're corrupted even. But I think Hooper comes in and represents some potential salvation in a very ordered way, because if we can defeat the shark by knowing the shark and coming into saying, oh, it's just a beast, maybe we can catch it and release or move it or kill it somehow very scientifically. And I do want to talk about Hooper for another.
Yeah, well, so if going back to the topic of order, which in case you haven't noticed with this episode, we're going to be saying the words order and chaos a lot, so get used to it, but it's very important to understanding further stories. So you have Hooper, Richard Dreyfuss, who I just personally find unlikable. He's an unlikable character to me. He's supposed to be. He's this yuppie before even this 75, so this is even before yuppie's really an idea. Right. But this rich kid who loves sharks. The scientist comes from the Oceanographic Institute. Did I say that? It was Oceanic?
Oceanic, yeah, he's a marine biologist.
Yeah. He's a scientist. He's this avatar of order. He's this creature bred by order. If you think about wealth, privilege, prestige, education, he knows everything there is to know about sharks. But I think from our, one of our first introductions of him, even before the autopsy, he's going back and forth with these fishermen who live every day on the sea, and they just know he's, wet behind the ears. It's like, who's this kid? Right. But then when you get into the autopsy, he's immediately revolted. He's immediately unprepared for the reality of it. You also see frequently throughout the film, he is obnoxious, arrogant. He's got a chip on his shoulder. He's got something he's got to prove. But there's an immaturity there. Even the night boat trip, he's kind of flippant about, and that for him is a threshold moment. And, coming literally face to face with a victim. But he serves the role of technology, of information, and the usefulness of it, but the weakness of it.
Yeah, I think Hooper is one of the characters that I, at first, felt comfort in, and then as I kept watching, I felt it difficult to resonate with him. And as I have looked back, I've also kind of struggled to identify his intertextuality, because I think Brody and Quint represent clearer figures for me in stories that I'm familiar with. But maybe Hooper is us, the viewer. Because for me, going into it, the most ordered thing would be to like, okay, let's make a plan. We're going to use this. I don't want to be aggressive. I want to stay safely on the island. I don't want to even go near the beach. I want to try to figure out a way where we can just get rid of it. The quick, easy way. That would be my instinct as just a everyman. And for me, the characters of Brody and Quint have a clear allegorical counterpart, which is Santiago in The Old Man in the Sea for Brody, and then Captain Ahab for Quint from Moby Dick. And they are very clear allegorical references, figures to me that, the long drawn out approach overnight. The second act seems really long. All of a sudden you realize you're at the end of and then you finally get to the suspense. That's how The Old Man in the Sea reads. It's like, okay, all right. How many times can you describe something, this way, Hemingway? Come on. Like, can we get to it? And then I think with Quint, with Captain Ahab, there's this like lost aggression. There's the woundedness of his past. Ahab has a peg leg. There's obviously a wound there. And then you hear Quint's story from World War II of having to be in shark-infested waters where 2/3 of his comrades were eaten by sharks, and he made it out alive. And that wound that he carries, and which is why maybe he smashes the radio and he resists all the technology that Hooper brings to the table.
It was consumed by vengeance.
Right. Vengeance, but also I think there's a fear of his past where he feels like guilty. I think there's guilt there as well, where he looks back and recognizes that, it was just a numbers game. I could have been one of those. The shark could have chosen to take a chomp at me. He even describes they went to check on someone and realized that he was just half a body, which is a little bit of foreshadowing. This is the first bite takes place. He's, in the shark's mouth.
Torso.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think he's, he is a man of chaos.
Right.
He lives on the outskirts.
Right.
Even our first introduction to him, the nails on the and you could tell the whole room's kind of like, oh, here we go.
Right.
And then once he's done, which he lays out the most sensible plan. He lays out the plan that's going to happen.
Right.
And the mayor's just sort of kind of like, oh, okay, well, we'll take that under advisement, and it just moves on. And then Quint, he's out. And then when they get the wrong shark, Quint sails by. He just kind of looks and he laughs at him. He knows, and in some sense, he's got a truer knowledge of the beast than Hooper does.
Right.
But he's so consumed with his desire to kill that he becomes a shark.
Right.
He becomes that thing which he's seeking to destroy. He names his boat Orca, which is a shark killer.
Right.
Mindless. And yet something I noticed is interesting. We talk about the amoral nature of the shark. And Brody never speaks of the shark personally. Hooper's always using the Latin term, and then great white. And he views it as this, the form of shark. Quint uses personal language when talking about the shark. He's a smart one, this one is. He's under the ship. He personifies. And I think that's the danger of being so seeped in chaos.
Right.
Chaos is impersonal.
Right.
And I even think that's where you get into, that's the source of racism, anti-Semitism, all these, white hatred, you ascribe personality to these objective forces. Chaos is an objective force. It doesn't matter what culture, what society, whatever, things always turn destructive. It's the nature of reality. But when we become so consumed in fighting it and killing it, we begin to lose sight and hone in too much. And ultimately, his drive to kill this past enemy drives him to madness. He destroys the radio, destroys the ship, but then he's literally consumed by it.
Right.
His past consumes him, and you brought up very accurately that he ends up dying in a specific way to his comrade in the sea.
Right. Yeah, and there's the moment, one of the powerful shots is when Brody's trying to, they grasp hands and arms for a second. And then Brody has a handle on the ship, and then, you feel like, oh, he's going to be able to save him, but then the comrade not lets him down, but there's that comrade representation there with Brody, who it's you or me here, and I'm going to hold on if I can, but I'm going to make sure that I'm safe, and I'm going to stay anchored up here. I'm not going to go any further myself he could have jumped down to try to free Quint.
I also think it was interesting, something I noticed on this viewing, the air tank. And I'm not quite as settled on what it means. Of course, air tends to symbolize spirit, tends to symbolize life.
Sure.
But I think in this, it's something that Matt Hooper brings along. It's technology. Quint is distrustful of all of Hooper's things. It's dangerous because it's what Brody almost sets off. And of course, that's the setup to it. But then that's what crushes Quint's hand that makes him let go.
Right.
That's what sends him to his inability to integrate that aspect that then Brody takes and uses to kill the monster. Uses to kill the shark.
Right. Yeah, and think that the two elements that Brody uses to kill the monster are very representative of each of those two foil characters as well. He uses a gun to shoot the tank. And that's one of the motifs that I was picking up myself as I was watching. There seems to be a lot of glasses fumbling and a lot of, dramatic, taking of glasses, which is why I chose to wear mine. I usually wear my contacts, but I thought I kind of noticed something with the glasses. There's Brody and Hooper both wear glasses. They're intellectuals but vulnerable. Quint doesn't wear the glasses. He relies on his instinct and experience, even though he could probably wear a pair of spectacles because he was a decent shot. He was able to shoot the harpoon into the shark and everything, so perhaps he doesn't need the glasses, and there's a symbolic element of that. But I also think that there's this the moment at the end when Brody shoots the shark, his glasses have been taken off. He's not relying on his the aid there. He's kind of beyond that. He's focused on the task at hand. The glasses are representative of this idea of intellect and focus and everything, and he just knows what he has to do and falls behind that. He kind of allows himself to escape a little bit.
Oh, something I promised I wouldn't get too psychological, but something that I think is true. I think the existence of the unconscious is undeniable. If you know anything about human behavior, we tend to do things we don't think about. We just tend to do things for reasons that we're not always aware of. So I think that's pretty subtle. You could fight me in the comments. Boost engagement. That's my tactic. Make controversial statements.
Subtle, Curt, subtle.
Yeah, so you have the unconscious, right? We have things that live in the unconscious. The chaos monsters often symbolize these unintegrated parts of our psyche. I think it's interesting. The shark lives deep beneath the water. Quint's strategy, which ultimately works, is to attach the barrels of air, which elevate the shark, bring it back up to the surface, get it to the surface. That's ultimately where Brody's able to kill the shark. The shark is above water, and you can see its mouth. You can see the tank in its mouth. So I think there's an interesting idea there. Again, air. I don't know where that fits into everything. Where that fits into this. It's going to take more reflection.
Well, I think the air. Yeah, I mean, air representative of that's the biggest factor that you lose when you go underwater, unless you're tied to the tank, like Hooper was. He's down there this whole time, hiding behind rock or coral, or whatever it was down there. He's hiding away with his ability to breathe underwater. So I think air holds a very specific point there, but I think also it's without air you can't breathe. So for us to be able to visualize it and see it in a very practical way, I think it's also representative of life, and that representative, like you said, spirit. Christ breathes life into the his apostles. Today we're recording this on Pentecost, so literally that was the reading at Mass today, right? So there's this element of breath and air that's very, very spiritual.
Yeah, it's also, you think about breath. Breath is reason. We tend to think of reason as thought, which is a very modern concept.
Right.
Reason, intellectual dispute was verbal. It was how we speak. And so maybe think of air as the thing out of which reason is made. It's the material. It's the Play-Doh of words.
Right.
And so that's what gives Hooper, who's just as insufficient or is just as flawed as Quint is. I think there's Hooper kind of gets put in his place or revealed to be as immature as he is when he's wrong about what cut the line.
Right.
It's a game fish. And Quint, there's no game, so that's with you city boys. You don't know when to admit when you're wrong. And what is Hooper's reaction? So Hooper kind of has this nexus point, this judgment point, that Brody passes the test ultimately. Hooper fails. What's his response?
Faces.
Yeah. A childish response. He can't accept the fact that he was wrong, and so ultimately he's proven incapable. And yet his salvation is in that oxygen tank. I didn't connect that. That helps kind of piece together
Right.
what the air tank is.
There's the three levels of the air. There's the air that's safe in the tank Brody's relying on amidst the chaos underwater. There's the air above the water that you're able to breathe, obviously, when you're not underwater. And then there's the tank that ends up being the explosive moment when Brody's able to make contact after firing several intense shots where you're like, you kind of know what he's maybe going to try to do. Now, will he? I don't know. You know, you kind of expect it, but at the same time, you haven't seen Hooper in a while. Quint's been eaten. His flesh is still on the jaws.
Yeah.
You know, there's this very gory shot where I happen to glance over at my wife, and she's like, you know, very, you know, shaken by it. It's very much so a terrifying shot. And you just don't know. Maybe the shark's going to prevail. It's called Jaws after all. He takes up 2/3 of the, you know, the posters sometimes, depending on the poster. You know, there's a Jaws 2. Maybe it's the same shark. You start to think, you know, but I'm digressing a little bit. But I think Brody, the hero, has a couple different moments that I want to key in on. Obviously, the major one is when he's able to succeed. He's able to, maybe he wouldn't have had the strength, or maybe another shark could have gotten him. But Hooper is revealed to have been okay as well. So they're able to paddle in together back to the beach, the moment of triumphal return to the beach, to safety. But one, coming from a, you know, the film aspect of it, you know, my background of study, there's one particular shot that I think is famous among filmmakers, and that is the parallax shot on the beach, which I think is this key moment. It's Brody's awakening. He's able to face the reality and see the blood in the water. It's not something that's, it could have been this, it could have been that. I don't know who to believe. I'm being told not to believe what my instincts tell me. I can, you know, he's uncomfortable the whole time. And one thing I love about that scene is people are cutting through the camera, and every time someone walks through, it cuts to him, closer up to him, which is in film is not a convention, and especially in the mid-70s, for almost like a jump cut, where someone passes through and then you get closer, passes through and it gets even closer, passes through again and it backs up. And then when the attack happens, there's clarity through. And the way they shoot that shot is very unique. There's behind the scenes footage of the dolly on the track, and Brody sitting on one side, and they move the camera at a pace of a similar for the zoom on the camera to be zoomed out. I'm try to speak layman's terms just to explain it. No offense.
Oh, I need them.
Yeah. But as you move closer and zoom out, it offers this perspective, you know, very drastic perspective change. And it's something that I think has been replicated in different moments, but there's sort of a spiritual vertigo that happens, this responsibility all weighing in on him, realizing that this is real. I've witnessed it with my own eyes. I will not be convinced anymore of this. And that's what we flash back to the docks when they feel like they've caught the shark. There's all this relief because he feels relief in that moment. But that is not the case. There's a, you know, a big switch that happens in Brody in that moment of that parallax shot. So it's one of the most unique shots, in my opinion, in all of film, you know.
Yeah, you know, you bring up the blood in the water. Something I think is interesting. The temptation towards complacency.
Right.
So Brody is uninitiated into
Right.
the ways of the ocean.
Right.
He goes out on the ship with Quint, and they're chumming the water.
Right. He's in charge of the chum. Hooper drives the boat.
Yeah, and he's got at first he's got the smelling or whatever, you know, in the napkin, and he's doing the chum.
Right.
And then later, he's smoking a cigarette.
Right.
He's whatever. He's grumbling, and that's the scene where you get. I've noticed through the film, Spielberg's always putting him off to the side and something out of focus.
Right.
You know, whether it was the guy asking for a favor and the boy or the girl's roughhousing in the water.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of the corner. You get the shark emerges, is nipping at their heels, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Unless the hero is attentive to the danger that that he faces. It's the same state that the city is in, the same state that the island is in. They're
Right.
complacent. They're inattentive.
Right. And I think two more factors on Brody that I want to bring up quickly here are, the scene when they're on the boat, the long scene, the second act, and the scene specifically, though, when Hooper and Quint are sharing their stories of past wounds, and then the long monologue about the Indianapolis and sitting in water and the shark attacks that Quint is traumatized by. They're both very well lit in this dark nighttime boat. They're both sitting under lights, kind of like we are here. Cut to Brody. He's very specifically positioned in half light, half dark. So if you look at that, there's a clear conflict in him. He doesn't know whether or not to join in to this banter. He even lifts up his shirt to maybe show the one wound he had. Maybe he was shot once as a policeman in New York. But that clear division in his face of light and dark represents that uneasiness, that chaos and order. And I think that that's something that signals his emotional isolation. It's not something that is he's battling. Am I one of them now? Can I handle this? And or am I going to fail? That there's a real fear here now. It's nighttime. It's dark. Is the shark coming? And then very quickly after that, they start getting rammed. I think is right. That next moment. And yeah, they don't know if they're going to make it out alive.
It ate the lights. That's Hooper's quote, which is really I thought was a very poignant line when talking about the chaos dragon, the chaos monster, the shark. Bruce, as they called the animatronic.
The animatronic that famously did not work for most of the film, and they struggled with it. It was the dramatic actor on set that did not want to cooperate.
Yeah.
Spielberg had to fight, and
and of course much ink and audio has been spilt on this. I will say I think there's one moment where the shark appears that doesn't work for me. It's when he breaks the boat and is about to eat Quint. There's like a wide shot.
Yeah,
the length of the shark, and it seems very unnatural the way it gets onto the board.
Right.
All of the face work is wonderful. That mouth opening up.
Oh, sure.
And the eyes, the way the eyes look.
And I think the use of real footage that they captured when Hooper goes down in the cage, and that's a real shark. So they interjected that in to show like, okay, this is what you're experiencing that.
This is what it should look like.
This is what it should look like. But yeah, you're right. That moment of that, but then the close-ups of him, they probably could have skipped that wide shot. But that's fear being realized. But I would have even appreciated, they did some perspective shots from the angle where Brody would have been from inside the boat, the tipping, from the pinnacle. But I think that stay there, hold that. Don't go wide where there's nobody seeing that angle where the shark is. The animatronic is very clearly like the size of it is represented correctly. Yeah, the length. Maybe
the front, the head, and the neck stick out too straight.
Right, and I think that's just a little bit of 1975. But then again, it's
I'll forgive the great Steven Spielberg this one.
Right. Would you rather it be sort of like Phantom Menace, where they would have used some graphics and some
it's like poems. It's like tome poems. Sorry, that's my George Lucas. We'll get to that. You're going to hear a lot more from George Lucas.
Pretty good George Lucas.
Oh, thank you.
No, and I think you mentioned the different. We started talking about the different lines too. The one that I love that apparently is improvised by Roy Scheider is, "You're going to need a bigger boat."
The Mandela effect. It's not we're going to need a bigger boat.
Right.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
Which
ends up being right.
Right.
Ends up being true. The shark devours the ship,
right.
the boat.
Right.
It's not big enough.
Right. Yeah, I think you maybe realize that too. He keeps saying it, but that cultural mantra that's often misquoted, as you point out, because we're not going to need a bigger boat. He's saying it to you. It's not something that is his problem at that point. It's
Well, he's always trying to, he's continually trying to shirk responsibility.
Right.
He's, it's the King David not going off to war.
Right. And he's constantly trying to call the Coast Guard. He's constantly trying to maybe draw the shark inland, and Quint steers back out to the depth of the waters. And I think there's this element of truth to it that they do need a bigger boat, but Quint wants to triumph in the Orca and triumph by his way, in his rationale. Right.
Pride. Personal. Sure. It's way too personal.
It's personal. Absolutely. And I think there are a couple overall elements of Quint. I don't think we've spent enough time on Quint. We started to mention his trauma and all of that, but I think as a character, he seems to just be the ship captain with all the, back on the dock or the shore, or he's all the mouths of sharks he's caught. He's just someone he's a killer, himself. That's what he is. There's not much depth to him. Hooper's having to call in to say, I don't need to go to Australia. I got one right here. And Brody's got his family, but Quint, he just kills sharks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's just like a lack of depth intentionally for him to realize, for us to realize, I should say, that he is maybe the one to go. Mm-hmm. Maybe if you're gonna pick which character, who are you rooting for to make it? You definitely want Brody to make it. You've met his family, the children. He's the hero. Maybe you think all three are gonna make it. Too. That's something that I kept thinking about. Which one's gonna die? Which one's gonna die? I'm recalling the first time I had watched it, and then you start to think, okay, maybe they're all gonna die. Maybe they're all gonna get out alive. It seems like they're gonna catch this shark, or they're gonna haul it in dead and hang it by its fin upside down, to show off, or is it going to defeat them?
Yeah, he's motion. Mm-hmm. He's pure. He's and that's chaos. Chaos is emotion. Emotions are unpredictable. Right. Hooper's reason. Something I thought was interesting was the act of imbibing together, drinking together. Mm-hmm. There's a sense of drinking the same cup. To use a scriptural term, it's a sharing of experience. When they've hired Quint, mm-hmm. he gives Brody the moonshine he's made, and drink some of this. And Brody cannot take the cup that Quint can.
Right.
He's is uninitiated. So it's constant. The entire story is pulling Brody out, who wants to stay. He lives on an island, and there's that great quote. It's funny. It doesn't make sense for a man who's scared of water to live on an island. Mm. It's only an island if you look at it from the water. Mm. That makes a lot of sense. He's got these perceptual issues to deal with his fear.
And he tries to tell Hooper, don't drink that, but Hooper's like,
yep. So there's that inability to go, and maybe it's not even inability. That's the divert. He's got to walk the middle. Mm-hmm. And alcohol you get drunk. It debilitates.
Right.
Symbolically,
mm-hmm.
It elevates at times. That's the positive symbolism of it. But I thought that was very interesting. And Quint, he's more charismatic than Hooper's funny. He's got some very funny moments, like when they're on the night boat, mm-hmm. and so you're rich? Yeah. just a very matter of fact.
Yep. Yeah.
He's got some goofy, but Quint, we want to know somebody like Quint. Mm-hmm. Crass. He's got the sailor songs, he's got the stories, he's crazy, he's a little unhinged, he's a little crazy, but he's a swashbuckler of sorts.
He's the one. What I was saying, which one do you think is going to get out alive? You kind of expect Quint to be the one to defeat the shark, because is Hooper going to defeat it? Is he going to be allowed to defeat it in the sense of the technology? Brody's sort of there just representing the island, the only one really truly from there, because Quint lives in the boat almost, and doesn't have a tie as much. He prefers to be out there. So you're kind of thinking, well, Quint's going to have to be the one to do it, and he successfully shoots the shark several times. And I think that there's this battle between the three of them. Just, for me, it was looking at, I mean, any one of them in theory could be the one, but Brody seems the least likely, just because he's the one questioning. He's the one making the mistakes with the knots. He doesn't know. He's not given responsibility. And I think there's a level of that in life too, until you're given your moment to be the hero. You're given your moment to succeed, to be trusted. He wasn't trusted all along.
Nobody listens to him in the entire movie.
No, except for maybe his boys played in the pond. The boys will listen, in that sense. The one scene that I kind of related to with my son too, I have a little boy myself, and the scene where he's, again, talk about the glasses motif. His glasses are off and he's doing the things with his hands, kind of just, and the boy's imitating him. So there's almost this blind trust of that child, that if other people around him would trust him in that way, then perhaps some of this could have been avoided. There would have been a few less killings, and then they would have gone out and paid Quint a little earlier. And that's the other side of it. I'm sure the mayor's happy. He didn't have to pay Quint.
Yeah, but I think Brody has to go through this transformation. He wants to shut down the beach. He wants to hunker down.
Right.
Which, the shark's going to go away.
Right.
And that's the hope. That's appeasement.
Right.
Well, fine. We're going to lock down.
Right.
It's not until the third public, which I guess is technically the fourth victim,
right,
the man in the rowboat,
right,
that he.
Yeah, I skipped over the dog earlier too.
Well, yeah. You've got the night swimmer. You've got Alex the kid. You've got Ben Gardner.
Right.
The man in the boat. And
right.
The rowboat guy.
But was Ben Gardner? I wondered about that killing. Was the shark just not interested in eating him?
Yeah, this is a little bit of Hollywood.
So I wonder, the jump scare. But I wonder if, not that whether he was killed or not by the shark, but perhaps there was some other, issue at play as well. But who knows? But yeah, that shark would have not left him in the water like that.
Yeah, I mean, but the swimmer girl,
right,
she was only half eaten. The Hooper says that the body, the upper half of the torso, the arm, I don't know.
So fifth victim then.
Yeah, the fifth is the dog.
Yeah,
dog could have run away. Dog could have just said, "Forget this."
Right.
I saw the shark. It's more sense there.
I think you're meant to think that the dog was the end.
Yeah,
people love dogs.
The intention.
Yeah.
But
don't try to keep the dog away.
Yes, I'm trying. The fifth victim. That's the moment when Brody realizes, okay, this is what the solution is.
Right.
We have to go out.
Right.
And face the chaos.
Right.
And I even love that shot, before we transition to the hospital. It's the pier, and you just see it's like between the pillars of the pier, and you see it's a gateway.
Right.
It's another threshold. It's to go out, and eventually he has to pass through that, in his ship.
And it's not only because he's the main character that he's going to be on that boat, but I think that as not even just as a chief of police, he could have just said, I'm going to stay here and maintain order. He makes a decision to step out and take responsibility in that way. And that's something that we're all called to do in different moments in our lives. And that might be a good way for us to start to wrap up. But I do have one little nugget that I wanted to share with you that I kept a secret.
Surprise
this whole time. It's a really silly thing. But so the question is, there's another line, famous line from the film that is used as someone famous, a production company took the name of this quote, and he has this gentleman has had successful films in his own right, including a TV show about a medical doctor.
A TV show about a medical doctor.
I don't think you're gonna get it. You want me to tell you?
Yeah.
So the quote is, "That's some bad hat, Harry."
Some bad hat, Harry.
When he
Oh,
distracted when he's trying to be, the guy's talking to
yeah.
with the weird cap on, and he's trying to see, and it's right before the parallax shot,
Yeah.
and he's trying to keep an eye out, and he doesn't want to talk to this guy. So the line is, "That's some bad hat, Harry," and that's something that I heard the line, didn't know it was from Jaws, didn't remember it was from Jaws, and I remembered, I was like, what show is this? What show is this? And it's the production company of Bryan Singer.
Oh, okay.
So I know you're probably an X-Men fan yourself, I would imagine. Perhaps a little dabbling.
Yeah.
Some other films he's done, but he's also the producer of the show House MD.
Oh, wow.
So at the end when you binge, as we do in this culture, you kind of, every time you finish an episode of House, you hear, "That's a bad hat, Harry."
Oh, is it the actual audio from?
Well, if I think that might be Bryan Singer's voice. I actually didn't look it up that deep.
Look it up and put it in the comments.
That is just a small little inkling of a nugget that I thought was kind of interesting.
That's very interesting.
It's not really about the film itself, but just more about the lore.
Yeah, no, I kind of thought, I noticed that line and I thought, come on, Brody.
Yeah,
That's your comeback. That's some bad hat.
Yeah, and it made me think, was it improvised? Like, but I
had to be. I don't know. It was just kind of like,
but why otherwise? But that I don't think it was actually, because that man was positioned there to be he was trying to get his attention about something, and he was trying to stay focused on and looking out. And that is Jaws.